Rolling.
And
We're rolling.
awesome that you were in the Marine
Hey,
Corps.
hey Noah.
Yes.
Noah, an hour and 25 minutes, and let's not go over.
Okay. I will. I'll let you know. But yeah. So welcome to the podcast, gentlemen. Special edition and retired Navy SEAL Captain. Nice to meet you, Frank. I'll turn this over to you since I think you go back some ways with Mr. DeJarnette.
Yeah, so Frank Forza here, Noah Green, thank you so much. We're here with our special guest today, Tom DeJarnette, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have Tom on. Tom is a 26 years in the Navy SEAL. He had different titles: Deputy Commander, Chief Staff Officer. The one he's most proud of is Commanding Officer. 26 years is a long time, and the reason that I wanted to have Tom on is that I think that I have so much respect and admiration for what the SEALs go through, what they represent, their code, and to have someone like Tom to be able to pick his brain on how to be mentally tougher, how to be more resilient, how to be more prepared. All of these lessons that the SEALs have, they apply to you if you're a jiu-jitsu athlete, if you're a wrestler, if you're a combat sports athlete, if you're anybody just trying to have more success in life, right? On the mats, off the mats. This is the kind of brain I love to pick. So, Tom DeJarnette, welcome to the Everyman BJJ podcast. It's so great to have you, man.
Hey, thanks, Frank. Thanks very much. Noah, it's really good to meet you for the first time on here. And, I'm very proud and thankful for your service in the Marine Corps. So, it's great. Brothers in arms. I appreciate that. And Frank, the friendship that we've struck up over the last few months has been rewarding and enriching for me as well. I think that, we do, like you said, we share a lot of similarities. Our mindset is very similar. And, it'll be interesting, as we continue to explore how we interact with each other. It's interesting to figure out the links that we had all the way from childhood, all the way up through adulthood, the links between your, fantastic international jiu-jitsu championship record, and SEAL teams, so working at a high level as a youngster and then growing up and continuing that and dealing with the adversity and, not mastering maybe, but, working on resiliency and grit along the way, to keep that edge as long as possible, and it's been really rewarding and enriching for me to learn from you over the last, few months. And I hope we get to keep doing it.
I really appreciate that, Tom. I hold you in really high regard. We have a mutual friend that introduced us, and Tom and I have been fast friends because there are a lot of similarities. I love to pick his brain. He loves to pick my brain on some of the creative stuff. Tom, honestly, I got to say this. Of anybody I've met on a strategic level in terms of strategy, devising, Tom DeJarnette is second to none. I mean, when it comes to like preparing and strategy and questions and asking the right questions just to make sure you're prepared, second to none. I mean, when Tom DeJarnette sends you a list of questions, it is so detailed and so exhaustive. So I love that about you. One thing that Tom and I do too, and we're going to talk about this today, Tom, we like to obsess over childhood, right? I always say the making of blank, the making of a Tom DeJarnette. And since you and I talk a lot about childhood and childhood and how that sort of plants the seeds for what people become later in life, and even some of these SEALs, tell us about how do you become a SEAL? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, growing up Tom DeJarnette, and what seeds were kind of planted in those early years that led you to be the kind of stuff that a SEAL is made of?
Oh, that's a fun question for sure. Because, you're right. We do talk a lot about our childhood because I think we like picking it apart because I think that, we fundamentally think that something happened in our childhood that, made us who we are. I believe that, and I think you believe that. And so that is a fun question to start with for sure. And it's fun because I had such a wonderful childhood. I mean, I really did. And I'm laughing a little bit because there's a dichotomy to my childhood as well. So my mother She was the type of mom who, both my parents led by example. My mom was a 12th grade English teacher, and she was out the door before me and my dad every morning. She took me to all my practices. She believed in me 100%, even when I was wrong. She was the type of mom who always supported you and always pushed you to go, dream big and go get it, right? And she supported that by her actions and her emotions in every which way. And so she was really good for me in that regard. And then you got my dad. And my dad was he was an electrical engineer, marketing executive at AT&T. He was also a colonel in the Air Force, and he flew 826s in Korea. And he loved the Air Force so much that when he had to retire, uh, he ended up joining the National Guard and the Army as an E7. So, so that's interesting. I think Noah can appreciate that, right? So he goes from being a colonel, full bird colonel, to an E7 simply because he loved, the brotherhood of the military. And he loved hanging around those guys. He loved the discipline and he loved the attention to detail. And so, he kind of held me accountable, right? He didn't let me, get away with anything. And, my actions, you paid the price for anything that you did wrong. You paid a heavy price for it. And so I'm not sure that, I listened or learned early on. I'm sure I fought that early on, but I think it paid off, later on in life. And so, he was really fair, but he was very strict along the way. And, like I can remember, one story in particular is, when I was a kid playing one of my first baseball seasons, he gave me a welder's glove. That was my glove. And I was like, well, Dad, this isn't what everybody else has got. He goes, yeah, but it doesn't matter. They're not hitting the ball hard and you can stop the ball. And, regardless of the fundamentals of, catching it in your webbing and, all that stuff, it is really embarrassing, right? And I still got the team picture with the welder's glove up here, but and at the time it was really embarrassing. But as I think back on it, I'm so proud of that picture now. That's an early lesson in resiliency right there. Like, hey, don't let the welder's glove get to you. So, that's kind of the dichotomy of my parents. And my thing, although baseball, the welder's glove story is a good case to talk about my dad. My thing was swimming, right? And so, much like you, Frank, I think, you were involved in football and you excelled in football and excelled in martial arts at an early age. And so I quickly found a home in swimming and, very early on, I had a national record as an 8-year-old and, I was ranked in multiple events all the way through high school and into college. And it's interesting because, as talented as I was in swimming, I didn't carry over really anywhere else in the rest of my life. I got in trouble in school. I had a hard time, frankly, making friends early on. And so I think that, that kind of put a chip on my shoulder. Right. And I've always thought that, I've always reflected, we always reflect on the big decisions in life and were they good and, were they the right thing to do? And so obviously I've always thought, was it good to go in the SEALs? And it's fun. It's a resounding yes, but it's like, why did I do that? And I think more than anything else is because I had a chip on my shoulder. I had something to prove to myself, something to prove to everybody else. And, frankly, so much so that when I was in the SEALs for 26 years, I would talk to other SEALs, my friends, and about this. And come to find out, a lot of those guys had chips on their shoulder. And so I think that, having that chip on your shoulder allows us to, push beyond what's comfortable, push beyond what's normal, push and maintain in that high performer realm, because with that chip on your shoulder also, makes you work harder, makes you have attention to detail. It makes you circle back. It makes you, because, you don't want to let yourself down and you don't want to let your teammates down. And so, you go above and beyond because that chip's on your shoulder. And I think it's good having that on there. And, I think that started with my weird childhood where, I was, really good at one thing, but the rest of my life wasn't really put together that well. And, I think that it manifested itself in my adult life, and that's how I ended up being a SEAL.
Now, Tom, and I just learned some stuff. You and I talked a lot, but I just learned quite a bit in there. And by the way, Tom, we were a scholarship athlete, University of South Carolina. You were All-American, I think, right? Swimmer down there, right?
I was. It was a relay, but I still count it.
Yeah. So you're a pretty good swimmer. I always think one of the things when you look at someone's why, right? Everybody talks about their why. And I see people say, well, my why is, they'll post on Facebook, whatever. Here's my kids. They're my why. And I'm always thinking, look, I know people love their kids and I know they'll do anything for their kids and die for their kids, but there's a lot more layers to someone's why than that. Like if we peel back layers, there's usually a lot more layers to that onion. And one of the things that I always wonder is for a Navy SEAL, and it's different for everybody. We're asking you about you. What is it that makes it worth risking your life, going through all of the physical demands, every temptation to ring the bell? What makes it worth it? What makes it worth the risk and worth the extreme pain? What makes it worth it? What's the thing that's so worth having that makes all of that worth it?
Well, so I mean, there was a lot in that question, and so I'm going to give a short answer, and then we can circle back to the other bits and pieces on it. But I think what makes it worth it for me? Ultimately the reward, right? The reward of being a SEAL is the opportunity and the experiences that I got. The opportunities with the people that I got to do these amazing things with, and the experiences that we got to do. I think you and I have talked about, pain and fear and sadness, versus happiness, and, feeling good, and, making, everything's roses and butterflies. And I think that you and I both agree that, you really don't know what good feels like and what happiness feels like unless you've also felt the deep sadness that goes along with loss and all the other emotions, like when we lose a parent, or you go on the battlefield and you lose friends, things like that. And the beauty is for me in SEAL team is that, man, you get to go to those extremes of extreme happiness and extreme sadness a lot. And it gives you scars, emotional scars, but that's a life well spent if you have a lot of scars, right? And so I don't regret anything like that. I think that just enriches your life, the good and the bad. And so for me, the reward, the reason to do it, personally, is because of the experiences and the people that I got to have those experiences and opportunities with. Now, I'll also say that as you get more senior, I think that when you start out in life, I think that you're self-absorbed isn't necessarily the right word, but you're focusing on self-fulfillment and self-achievement. And maybe you've got a girlfriend or a wife and your immediate family, and you're focused on working hard for them and working hard with them, and that's good, right? You need that, and that's important, because it sets a baseline and it lets you, I think gives you your grass, your foundation in the ground. But as you get older, right, I think that those things change. I think that you start wanting to take care of a larger group of people. At least me. This is another reason what I got out of SEAL teams is I got older and more senior, and what I loved doing. What I found was, my passion within. I mean, I know that's overused, but the thing that I enjoyed most about SEAL team as I got older was taking care of people and setting the conditions so that they could enjoy success, right? So setting the conditions, setting, an organization and a culture of trust and transparency and honesty, so that ideas and debate and discussion and planning can, be as honest as possible, as truthful as possible. Because I think that, when you do that and you build cultures like that and you have people who are participating in cultures like that, I think that it ultimately allows you to have more realistic and more durable solutions that last through the test of time a lot better than if you're jamming it down somebody's throat. And so, that's what I personally got out of SEAL Team, and then that's early on, and then later on, that's another piece of what I really got out of SEAL Team and what I thought I was good at, frankly, and what I enjoyed doing.
Yeah, and just for everybody watching, when I had Tom on, obviously Tom is speaking of his own experiences. He's speaking on his own behalf. Nobody out there is qualified to come on a podcast and probably speak for all the SEALs. There is the SEALs run there's the personalities, the experiences, the perceptions. You're going to have a bunch of different stuff. We're talking about Tom in particular, and him making sense of it. So Tom, in terms of what has being a SEAL taught you about life and about human nature? You have a great vantage point. What has it taught you about life and about human nature?
Okay, so another great question, and another fun question to talk about. So, obviously, I told you a little bit about my story, right? And so I had some character flaws, clearly, that had to be beaten out of me. And so if I talk about what SEAL Team taught me, and again, like you noted, this is different for everybody. I think different people have different things they're working on. Different people have different experiences. The SEAL Team, different people process their experiences in different ways, right? But for me, the things that I got out of it were, I'll start with humility, right? So, when we were swimming, now I didn't swim 10,000 yards a day, but there were guys one lane over who were, and I was still swimming an awful lot, and I thought I was pretty tough. But I tell you what, Hell Week was an eye-opening experience for me, right? So, I think that in sports you're used to, now jiu-jitsu is probably not like this, but swimming and track, things like that, they want you to be a really high performance machine, right? And so if you've got a banged up elbow or wrist or shoulder, you go get the muscle stim and the heating and the icing, and you want that machine to work just perfectly. But I think they want a pickup truck, a beat up pickup truck in buds, like a F-150 that's going to keep going with some bumps and bruises, and Noah can probably empathize with this, from his experiences in the Marine Corps. And I just wasn't used to that, right? And so Hell Week was an eye-opening experience. Getting through Hell Week with injuries was an eye-opening experience for me, and it changed the way that I thought of myself, and it changed the way I thought about myself in relationship to other people. When you go through that and you go through that crucible with, people like, 19, 20-year-olds, and they're just, they're breezing through it, man. It's shocking, what a lot of people are made of that I didn't realize before I got in there. Resiliency is another trait that I learned. I mean, I had a little bit of it, but we've got a saying in SEAL Team: fail forward, right? So in training, we're going to take you to failure. I mean, that's the point of some of the training evolutions, is to keep going until you fail. And then what are you going to do with it? How are you going to process that? How are you going to learn from it, right? And now you know that you've got a new limitation. You know what it felt like as you were coming up to that limitation. You know what it feels like as you hit that limitation. You know what it feels like to fail. And so, you learn to pick yourself back up. You learn to move that line a little bit further to the right, so that now you've got a new threshold. And that's just a lifelong lesson in being resilient, right? And so I learned that, and I appreciate that lesson every day, for sure. Problem solving is another one. I think SEALs are world class, set the gold standard for problem solving. I mean, there is nothing that you can't tell a SEAL or a SEAL platoon or a SEAL team, go solve this problem, and they will figure out a way to do it. And I wish there was a way to articulate that, when we're transitioning. I wish there was a way to make civilian leaders understand that when they're hiring SEALs, that like, look, our thing is problem solving. That's what we do. And learning to do that, and learning how to creatively do that, and learning how to stay with the problem until it's solved, learning how to, hey, if you got 9/10 of it done and then it didn't work out, stopping and starting over from a different perspective and solving it that way, that is one of the hardest things in the world to do, right? Because you're wasting time and energy, but you got to do it. And so, and learning that and having that mindset is a special gift, the SEAL teams gave me. I think you learn about authentic leadership. Everybody talks about leadership, and everybody thinks they know what leadership is. And, some people really, really are natural leaders. A lot of leaders are learned. I learned leadership. I was not a natural leader. But what I also learned along the way is it has to be authentic. It has to be your way. You can't fake it. You can't do it in some way that you see somebody else doing it who's successful, because, everybody will sniff that out. And in SEAL teams, they're not going to tolerate it. Probably much like the Marine Corps, they're not going to tolerate inauthentic leadership. So, it's a great skill to develop, and it's a rewarding life when you get to be a leader. But you're not going to enjoy it, and you're not going to be good at it. And frankly, people are going to, fight you on it if you're inauthentic. So, develop your own style and then enjoy using your style. And that was another gift that I got from the SEAL team. I tell you, the last thing I'd tell you before talking about human nature is that, and I knew this long before, you get back to the welder's glove. I knew negative reinforcement is a very good tool, and I've always known that works really well. And I would think that people like us, people like you, Frank, people like you, Noah, and people of our mindset understand the value of negative reinforcement. Right? My father worked on me in that regard. Swim coaches. I had a swim coach that said, "Tom, the day I stop yelling at you is the day I don't care about you anymore." Roger that. SEAL team, is all about negative reinforcement. It's like, you don't get any attaboys in the SEAL team. Your attaboy is a job well done, right? And so, I firmly believe in negative reinforcement. So that just was reinforced as SEAL team. As far as human nature goes, and this is an interesting question, because I think that when we talk about human nature, it's not just my my life's work in the SEAL teams. This is all of human nature. So we have, and this ties into time at the Middle East, but in interacting, I'm going to talk about it from the interactions that I've had with host nation forces and partner forces overseas. Human nature, in my opinion, one of the key facets of it, the point that is worth mentioning here today, is that I think people will always back what we call the strong horse. Regardless if the strong horse is right, regardless if the strong horse is just or fair or honorable, they will always back the strong horse because it's in their own self-interest to do so, right? And so I think that that works that's on the battlefield for sure, but then I think it carries over into many facets of life, right? And you can imagine where it would go, but it's interesting that people will follow a strong horse because it's in their own self-interest, out of fear or because they think they're going to get something, or they genuinely believe in it. But they will generally follow the strong horse even if they know it's wrong. And I find myself doing that from time to time. and I struggle with it when I find myself doing it, because, that goes to having the moral courage to do what's right. And if more of us had the moral courage to do what's right, and boy, what a tough thing, peer pressure, loyalty, all those bits and pieces come into play. But if we could develop our sense of moral courage, the world would be a hell of a lot better place, and we would hold people accountable much more so, who needed to be held accountable, if we all had a little bit more moral courage, me included.
Tom, that's so much good stuff there. You said, you made me think when you said in the SEALs, a lot of the negative reinforcement is how it's designed, and that actually helps you get the most out of each SEAL. And it made me think of someone like Bill Belichick, the coach of the Patriots, right? Maybe arguably the best NFL coach of all time. And it's interesting because the best NFL coach of all time just doesn't, he doesn't say much. He looks kind of grumpy. And his thing, of course, was like, do your job, right? It's like, if you could get a good job out of Bill Belichick, I'm sure there are guys that were just thrilled and elated if the guy came up to you and took the time to say, great job, great block, just that, or good block, right? You're probably not going to get a great out of him. Just to hear that guy say, good job, good block, good play. The players just live for that, right? Just to get that much out of him, or a Nick Saban. I also was thinking about you when you were talking about Hell Week and how eye-opening that was, and how humbling it was, and how, some of the feats of strength and endurance and pain threshold that you saw there that stood out. And I thought about you going through Hell Week, right? Those physically grueling, physically demanding. Other people are ringing the bell, right? They're ringing the bell. They're injury disqualified. So certain prospects there who are trying to make it drop out. Did ringing the bell cross your mind? And if it crossed your mind, what's the thought process that defeats ringing the bell? How do you not ring the bell? What's the mindset? What's the self-talk? And did it cross your mind? And how many times did it cross your mind?
Okay. Hey, can I circle back to do your job real quick?
Yeah,
before I answer the Bill question? Okay. Yeah. And I love that. And I've heard that Belichick quote before, and I love it. And so if I could break it down, because it's bigger than do your job for me. Right. Mm-hmm. And it goes to two or three of the critical components, I think, that are that have to be part of somebody's chemical makeup in the beginning, at least. Right. And so when you say do your job, you have to be competent. Right. So you must, whatever you're doing, whatever you go and decide you want to do in life, you have to be competent first and foremost. It's a must. You can't do anything until you're competent, right? And then the second thing you do is what Bill Belichick's talking about performance. Do your job. So perform every day. Compete and perform and do your best every day. We got a saying in SEALs says, earn your trident, right? It's part of a much larger ethos that we have. And people disagree on what's important and what means the most to them as far as the ethos goes, because there's bits and pieces in there for everybody. But everybody knows earn your trident every day. Do your job. That's the equivalent of do your job, right? Because, and the reason why it's so important to be competent and to, have perform and do and perform and compete and try and win every day is because that's how you get trust, right? And so what I think Belichick is saying, when he says do your job, he's going, look, if you do your job, then I'll trust you. And if I trust you and your teammates trust you, now we're going to play bigger and better than ourselves. We're going to be a force multiplier. Because if we trust each other, now you know your lane, you know your responsibilities, you know what you're going to do. And that frees me up in my mind to focus on what I got to do and what I got to achieve at. And so now, I don't get distracted by the white noise because I'm worried that little Timmy is not going to do his job. Because if everybody's doing their job, now we're working on a higher level. because now we're able to focus and execute at a higher level because I don't have to worry about somebody else not doing their job. And so, performance and competence leading to trust is huge. And there's one more piece of it that we'll talk about later on. But I just want to circle back to do your job because I love that quote as well. But I think it means so much more than just do your job. Okay. So what? Ringing the bell, man. Now, ringing the bell. What I mean, that is the golden question, right? So that is the golden question. And I'm going to be a big letdown here because I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer. I can tell you that I didn't think about ringing the bell. I mean, yeah, of course you think about ringing the bell, but like I never got to seriously where I was thinking about ringing the bell. Now, what I've thought about regarding people who ring the bell is I've always wondered if it's a personal decision. Are they ringing the bell because they're in pain or they're so miserable that they, don't feel like that they can continue? Or are they ringing the bell because they feel like they're letting their teammates down? They're not holding up their end of the boat. They're not holding up their end of the log. I've always wondered about that. And I don't know because I don't know. I should have asked those questions to students, but you don't want to mess with them and they're in that very delicate state of mind. And so I never ask those questions, but I always wonder about it. Now, I also got to tell you the history of the bell, right? Because, you see the bell and you ring the bell and it's like degrading and it's like demeaning, right? But it's not. It's not. It was never intended for that. And it's not intended for that even today. So ringing the bell started way back in the day because when you were in Hell Week and you were up for 5 days with no sleep, you get 4 hours of sleep in 5 days. You get, I think it's 1 or 2 hour, you get 1 2 hour nap and another 2 hour nap. They changed that up, but you get about 4 hours of sleep in 5 days. And so people are delirious. I mean, they're truly delirious and they just walk off, right? And the instructors couldn't keep track of them. And so they implemented the bell as a way to try and keep track of, students who were, walking off because they were delirious from Hell Week. Okay. So that's how it started. And so then it's like, okay, well, we got more instructors, better control now. So why don't we stop the bell? Well, so we also have psychologists and psychiatrists that are on staff now. And so, they're very helpful for, guys who've been through numerous combat deployments, and you can imagine why. But they've also looked at the bell and they've been like, hey, this bell is actually really good because it's a conscious decision that a student's making. So a decision has to make this decision on his own. And when he does, it gives him closure, right? And so when he gets closure, I made the decision that this program is not for me. I'm going to ring the bell, and that indicates that I am selecting to leave the program. And so what it does is it gives them closure, right? And then the psychologists, psychiatrists, and the leaders are able to get with these kids and be like, hey, let's process this. And so they're like, what did you learn? What did you get out of this? What's the good stuff that you got out of this? And then how are you going to take what you've learned into your next challenge in life? So let's turn this into a positive experience. What did we learn from it? What do we want to do with it? And how are we going to be successful using what we got out of this experience in the next venture you attack? So the bell, it represents finality and you're on the spot when you do it, but there's a lot of goodness to the bell as well. And I really don't know what makes somebody ring that bell.
I thought you were going to tell me hey, Frank, it crossed my mind 3 or 4 times to ring that thing. And I blah. So that's a testament to your mindset, your resilience, pain threshold. I
can tell you a funny story if you want. The closest I got was we were doing rock portage. It was the first night of Hell Week, and it was really cold. It was a December Hell Week. And so we popped our boat on the rocks. And so the instructors told me to go up to the van and get another boat out. And so I'm trying to get it, and I go in the van. and the heater's on, and there's like a few kids in there who decided that the program wasn't for them. They were sitting there and they had a donut and they had coffee and the heater was on, and I sat down and I was like looking at them and I was talking to them, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so awesome. And then something happened, something clicked, and I was just like, I got to get out of here. And I literally, it was like leaving a haunted house. I like was scratching at the door, getting out, and I got out. And the second I got out, I was like, Jesus, I want to go back in, but I didn't. And so that was the closest I got.
Let's talk about balance, okay? Balance, because there are a lot of parallels between the Navy SEALs and say an elite martial artist or an elite fighter. Obviously, you guys are dealing life and death in our ecosystem. There's not much of that, right? The most somebody could have is a serious injury, or they could go to the emergency room. But the psychological makeup, there's a lot of the same qualities. And one of the things I'm interested in is, how do you balance being in that alpha ecosystem and all the demands of that, and all of the, sort of the alpha energy and the testosterone and the toughness and the mental toughness, and then transitioning to civilian life when you're off the clock, when you're at a mall, when you're out in traffic. How do you see, because that seems that can be a challenge for a lot of people, right? They say, if you want to see someone's true character, give them power, give them a lot of power, let them be maybe the roughest person in the zip code or in the city. And then how do they wear that power? What have you seen work in terms of balancing so you can know when to flip the switch, right? When you're on a mission, or you're, whatever, guys are in a war zone, whatever, and then coming back to everyday civilian life, to where you're able to just lay low, have exercise restraint, be humble. What do you do? What have you seen work to balance that so that you don't get yourself in trouble outside of, a mission?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things, a lot of programs that we have in the SEAL teams, right? And so that are trying to address this. And so I'll real quickly tell you a little bit about those programs. We have a human performance program. It's called and it's a whole man concept type of thing, where there's a number of pillars, from psychologists and psychiatrists and spiritual health, and yoga and stretching and nutrition, and these pillars are there designed to help help the service members, help the SEALs, right? And so the idea is that as you go up a trajectory in your career, you start down here, you've got a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of knowledge and experience. You gain more experience, more responsibility, but you're going to get broken, right? Mentally or physically, with numerous combat deployments. And so these pillars are there to hopefully identify problems sooner, and then fix problems, as if they happen, to get you back online to continue up that trajectory. So it's not perfect, but it does work, because we force people to check in with all of these disciplines and learn and do programs with all these disciplines at various points in a workup. And oh, by the way, it's really interesting, because when you do that with psychologists and psychiatrists, right, it used to be a stigma, right? When Noah was in, if you went and saw the psychiatrist, you were going to get pulled offline. They weren't going to let you deploy. And so now you get behind your peers and you can't make rank. And so, you're having a bad experience. But now if everybody's doing it, that stigma's gone. So it's really good in that regard, right? We also have a number of programs for the family members, things like that. Foundations help out with the family members, which is a great thing, because, as we all know, if your family is happy, if your wife is happy, it gives you freedom of movement to do what you want to do, and it clears your head up so that you can focus on what you need to focus on, right? And so that's kind of what NSW, the enterprise, is doing. from my perspective, I think that when you're in the middle of it, you don't realize. Number one, when you're in the middle of it, when you're doing platoon after platoon, or you're at a SEAL team and you're running a SEAL team and you're doing the day-to-day tactical operations, number one, you're having so much fun doing an incredible mission with incredible people that you don't you don't necessarily want to quit. And number two, your teammates, right? So you don't want to let your teammates down. And anytime that you're offline or you get out of that game, it feels like you're letting your teammates down. So I think when you're in it, you can be in it for years. The enlisted guys and the guys at SEAL Team 6 are in it for years, constant, high alert, just stress through the roof for years on end. I mean, it's shocking how long that they can maintain that level of stress in their body. But then when you come out of it and you start having to process it because you're out of it, you're on a staff or you're retired, that's when you got to deal with it. And again, you need professionals around to help you deal with it. You need a loving, supporting family with kids, kids who, love and support you as well. You need that because, the divorce rate in the SEAL team is, I think, north of 90%. I think it's well north of 90%. And that's hard, right? It's because it's a hard life. And, so I think that you're going to have to you can deal with it now or you can deal with it later. I think that whatever situation you're in is going to have a lot to do with when you have to process it, but you're going to have to process it. And so that's the deal. And so I think that, when you transition out of the military and you're going to find another job, and, I don't have a lot of experience with this, and I wouldn't say that my first experience was all that good. I had a job for just under 6 months. And what I got out of that, now that I'm still processing that experience, by the way, what I got out of that is that I now know my value to civilian corporations. I know better how to articulate my value to civilian organizations. Unfortunately, I'll say that I think civilian organizations kind of focus on the individual accomplishments more so than the team objectives. I think that there's a willingness to not necessarily follow the best policy that would help the mission or the company because of individual rice bowls sometimes, and breaking. And so then, those are things that I have to learn, and I have to sort of kind of get my head around is, what is, what's the mindset in the civilian world compared to the mindset in the civilian world, and getting your head around the differences and accepting the differences, because I think maybe I might have tried to change some of those differences. That doesn't work. So you gotta, Noah's laughing because I'm bringing him back 25 years ago, probably when he transitioned. But it's interesting, and so I still need to process a lot of that and recognize that you're not going to necessarily change those organizations and change that mindset, and so you got to figure out a way to get gratification in those organizations with a different culture than what you're used to.
Noah, you've been waiting patiently. I know you have a question for Tom. What have you been enjoying it? You've been processing it. What you have a question or a comment?
Sure. It's so hard to find your tribe when you leave active duty. It's so hard. And I found I concur with you exactly your sentiments. The civilians, and I'm going to speak to them like they're an alien species, because they are aliens to us still to this day. And it was a bitter pill to swallow that I haven't heard that phrase in a long time. And when you talk about individual rice bowls, um, that's a bitter pill to swallow. And I want to throw out to you, and I don't know if you've had a discussion with Frank. Have you considered taking or participating in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Because I will tell you that for me, I found that tribe in after looking for a while, and it's wonderful.
Oh, that's a great question. And you know that SEALs, we love, there's all kinds of mixed martial artists in the SEAL teams. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, as a young guy, I took a number of combat fighting courses. And I thoroughly enjoyed them because I took karate when I was younger, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. But what's interesting about the combat fighting courses that I took within the SEAL teams is, whenever you would start, you would learn these techniques, and we had some pretty interesting techniques. And the flying neck seal, I'm not sure if you could look that one up, but I'm not even going to go into it because it's a little embarrassing. But we had some interesting techniques, and so what would happen is you would get into sparring, you would automatically revert back to whatever you knew and whatever you were comfortable with, right? And so, all the stuff that you learned in your combat fighting course was out the window, and everybody was doing what they were comfortable with. And so then I did a tour over in Spain, and we had a guy in our training cell who was a really accomplished mixed martial artist. And so he started teaching us some jujitsu, rolling on the mat. And so, yeah, I was totally getting into that and totally loving it. And then I broke my neck. So I got C5, C6. I got a metal plate in my neck, and it was from a guillotine choke. And so I stopped doing jujitsu after that.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I do love it. I get it. And I got good friends down in Tampa who do it, and they're at a gym. And so, they've got a jujitsu gym, and then also it's their version of CrossFit. And so I'll go in and still, do the CrossFit with those guys and stuff like that from time to time. So I love it. I respect the hell out of it. But I'm cautious of it. I'm cautious.
Understandable.
Hey, Tom, I wanted to say, you and I have had this conversation, but it'd be interesting for the listeners and for Noah, because you sort of wonder which athletes are better prepared to be a SEAL. Like, you've got these wrestlers that'll run through a wall and who got this amazing drive. You got the swimmers that have the lungs and can handle being in the water and the misery of swimming that comes with swimming and holding your breath, and being miserable and cold and dealing with the shivers. Just anecdotally, from not speaking for the SEALs, but just speaking for Tom DeJarnette, which athletes have you seen that tend to convert the best for that particular challenge of being a SEAL?
That's a good question. And we've spent a lot of money and resources and time and energy trying to figure out, the best sports to become SEALs, the best parts of the country to become SEALs. And frankly, we can't figure it out. Anecdotally, some people will tell you that all SEALs play chess. They'll tell you that lacrosse is a sport that should be not a prerequisite. That's a little strong of a word, but lacrosse is a strong indicator of success in BUD/S. They'll tell you that people from New England are better equipped to go through BUD/S because of cold water. But the truth is that nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean, I can remember again in Hell Week. I can remember coming out from Chow, and a whole boat crew quit, right? And so, the boat crew is made up of all different types of athletes. Right? So a boat crew is how you get chopped up. It's a six, 7 man group underneath an IBS, which is a inflatable boat, small, and you carry this boat everywhere in Hell Week. And sometimes they load it up with sand and do whatever. But we got done with chow one night, and a whole boat crew had quit. And so, that tells me that, and they were all different types of athletes. So that tells me that it's not a sport that dictates, who's going to make it and who's not. You can't look at somebody and tell if they're going to make it or not. If the whole boat crew quit and they were all eating chow together, they were having some sort of conversation that didn't end well for them, right? And so mentally, something happened to those guys, right? Where they all quit at chow. And that has always stuck with me, because that tells me that it's a mental game. And it tells me that, something in that conversation that boat crew leader was having, or somebody who was very influential within that boat crew was saying, and it affected everybody so much that they all decided to quit.
Amazing. So you reminded me, and I think you and I have talked about this, but Daniel Kahneman, the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and there's
Yes.
he talks in the book, and I guess he is a Nobel Prize winning, I think, economist, and he's done some excellent books. But he talks a lot about decision making and the flaws of human decision making and following our gut. And one of the things he talks about in there, Noah, you're very well read on this. You probably read this. You read way more than I do. But he talks about some research that had been done in the military where they were trying to, basically the same thing we're talking about. They're trying to predict who will be the leaders, who will quit, who will this. And they go in and they look at the young members of the military, and they're trying to predict who's going to emerge as the leader, who's going to be the toughest, who's going to rise up. And in general, they're not very good. Even the smartest minds are not very good at predicting who's going to be the best, who's going to be the best leader in here, who's going to be the best soldier. They're not very, we don't have it down to a science. We're surprisingly not very well able to make these predictions, which is shocking, because we think, well, okay, the best athlete walked in the room, the most alpha, whoever, that's going to be the leader, that's going to be the highest performer. And these ecosystems, the Navy SEALs, the fight world, the military, show us it's not that simple. It's a lot trickier than that to size up, to just look at someone. And what's interesting about that is all of us think, we make these instant judgments in life. We meet someone, 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, the way they talk, the way they move, the way they this, and we think we've sized up what their potential is, if they're worth knowing, if, whatever. And amazingly, a lot of times it's amazing how often we're wrong. We just totally read someone the wrong way and size them up the wrong way. And you see that a lot in the SEALs, where you can have this quiet, humble, doesn't look like a whole lot, and then winds up being one of your best performers. Then you got this other guy who's built like an Adonis. He's got the swagger, he's got the alpha thing, and he rings the bell day one.
Yeah, totally. You're spot on. So let me say this. Let me start by this before I get into the Kahneman book. I read that book, by the way. I didn't understand half of it because I'm not a smart man, but I get it. Thinking slow and thinking fast. It's about the two systems of thought, right? It's about instinctual type thought versus deliberate type thought. And let me come back to that in just a second. And let me tell you what I think some defining characteristics of SEALs are. I think that, obviously, I think they're really intelligent. I think even as intelligent as they are, I think their emotional intelligence is one of the strengths of SEALs. I think the SEALs' ability to read a room, process the room, make decisions based on what they're feeling from, people in the room, how the room's set up, how the room's positioned. I think that the emotional intelligence of dealing with situations and making instinctual decisions based on those based on how the room feels or how the interaction feels. I think SEALs do that better than anyone. I think they're very self-actualized. I think they understand themselves really well. And I think that helps them with their emotional intelligence. I think, frankly, have a strong emotional intelligence, you've got to be self-actualized. I think that SEALs are, generally lifelong learners. I think they're interested and curious about everything, and I think that that's not something that you learn. I think that's something that you're born with, where you're just curious about everything. You want to learn about it. And you want to help it or fix it or understand it, right? And so I think that's a characteristic. We've talked about world-class problem solvers. It's amazing the tenacity, the problem-solving tenacity, that the majority of SEALs have, and how well they do it. So, I think that is one of our strengths, and it's amazing, just how effective SEALs are in that. Now, a lot of that might be because our enlisted community, 65% of our enlisted community, has 4-year college degrees, approximately, which is it's not even close. No other community in the military, including special operations, comes even remotely close to that. I mean, and I'm talking 4-year degree, not an associate's degree, a 4-year degree. So, we're at a huge advantage as far as problem solving goes when you've got that kind of, polished, that's not the right word, just, trained brain power, in your group. And the last thing I'll say, and you talked about this early on, and this is probably where, high level sports, and SEALs intersects most notably. SEALs love to win. No, I've never met a group of people who wants to win more than SEALs. They we'll do just about anything to win. And I love that aspect. That goes to competition, and it's in the three of our DNA, right? We love to win, and we're willing to work and do what it takes to win, and it's in our DNA, and it's always been there, and I think it's one of the hallmark traits of SEALs. So now, as far as yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're going to say as far as.
Well, I was going to switch gears and talk about the Kahneman book,
Yes.
Think It's Slow and Fast, and how it relates to us. So I think what you're saying there is, we're talking about the two systems of thinking, the instinctual type reactive decision making, and the deliberate decision making, right? And so which one is better for being a SEAL? And honestly, I don't know. I think they both have their place. I think that I think that the instinctual piece comes into play earlier, a lot more on your instincts, because those are kind of unclear situations that you have to feel out using your emotional intelligence, and you've got a very short period of time to make some of those decisions. And then, then there are also garrison decisions that require a deliberative brain, somebody who processes risk and processes contingencies, processes assumptions and limitations and constraints and restraints, and, can come up with a plan that balances resources and prioritize efforts. And you can change the balance of resources at different phases. So they're both important, right? And I think experience. I think your life experience and your experience in the SEAL team obviously has a lot to do with how quickly you process information and make decisions, as well as your decision making matrix. And so it's hard for me to decide which one of those is more important based on Kahneman's book. I will say again, just to double down, you said that it's amazing how smart people can't figure it out. So, and I was like, we spent a lot of money on this, and we still haven't figured it out. And then I told you some anecdotal stuff. So, I mean, anybody who tells you that we know what we're doing, our dropout rate is north of 85% per class. So if a class starts, with 200 people, you're going to have somewhere between 30 and 40 get through Hell Week. So we clearly don't know what we're doing as far as, selecting the right people to go in. And, then you've got people say, well, you should change the curriculum. But this curriculum is tried and true. This curriculum has been around with very few changes for a very long time. I mean, it's based on, the principles from days of old, and it hasn't changed that much. And if we think that, we need to screen our instructors who deliver the curriculum better or whatever, we do a really good job of that, putting them through instructor qualification course so that they learn how to be a good quality instructor. But we do not want instructors, picking winners and losers out there. We do not want the instructor using his subjectivity to determine what he thinks a SEAL looks like. Let the curriculum do the work. The curriculum will take care of it. We just want the instructors to implement the curriculum. So when an instructor thinks that he knows something that the curriculum doesn't, and he can pick the guy who's going to be a good SEAL or who should be out of the program, that's where we run into problems.
What one thing, and Noah and I have talked about this many times on our podcast, is sort of the bonding. Like, there is a bonding when you have an ecosystem, whether it be the Navy SEALs, where things can be life and death. People get hurt when things are not done the right way to the T. It's imperative that you do things, as you said, you be super competent. You do things the right way. Your teammates trust you. You execute. You win. And when you look at the combat sports ecosystem, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, mixed martial arts, there is so much bonding that happens when you're sitting there. You're pushing another guy to the brink. You're giving him everything you got. He's giving you everything. You're pouring sweat. You're tired. Sometimes in the olden days, someone was bleeding, whatever. That guy slammed you, whatever. And there's a bonding that happens in suffering, when there's pain, when there's blows, when there's damage, when there's consequences, when there's physical consequences, when there's grit, when there's grueling. There is a bonding, there's a trust, there's all the pretensions out the window. And that's one of the beauties of your ecosystem when you look at the value of the relationships with other high performers, is that, people that are earning it. The bond that happens in those ecosystems is second to none, because all the BS and all the pretense and all the, well, let's cut corners and let's do this, it's out the window. You're dealing with a different caliber or crop of person who says, like I say, if you tell me somebody that wrestled in high school and they were a good high school wrestler, they wrestled in college, or you tell me they have a jiu-jitsu black belt, there's a lot I don't know about them. Or even someone with a college degree. There's a lot I don't know about them. There are people that aren't very smart who have a college degree. But one thing I do know is that they work harder to finish what they start. If someone's a black belt, I know from a reputable black belt, I don't know their work ethic, I don't know their intellect, but I know that they're inclined to finish what they start. If they earned a college degree, I know better than someone else that this person's more inclined to finish what they start. I know that about somebody wrestling in college. I know they don't want the easy way, or that really good high school. They don't want the easy way. They'll work. They're workers. There are certain knowns that come. You're a Navy SEAL. A lot of doors open just by that, because people know, they trust that they know, well, this person's, it's highly probable that Tom DeJarnette is really good at preparing, really good at problem solving. He doesn't quit easy, right? He's into earning it. He's going to be a hard worker. And so there's a lot to be said for some of the credibility of people coming out, when they're high performers in these different ecosystems. And as I was saying, the bonding that you guys have, I'm kind of jealous of. It's got to be second to none, to know that you're trusting even your life to the people on either side of you. That's so powerful in terms of like a brotherhood, a bond that's something that for the rest of your life. I mean, that's an amazing, I just wanted to point that out, but I wanted to say another thing. When it comes to reinforcement, negative, because I've argued this, and a lot of my friends don't like it because we're at a time in history right now in 2020 where everything is positive and feel good and happiness is the goal, and it's kumbaya and utopias, and there's a lot of that going on. I'm still of a younger generation where Dan Gable was very influential to a lot of young wrestlers like myself. I have seen negative reinforcement work. I'm not saying it's the only tool, but I've seen that work to great effect. Bill Belichick's made it work. A lot of great coaches have. Let me ask you this, just Tom DeJarnette speaking. What is it about negative reinforcement? What's the problem, I guess, with positive reinforcement? How come positive reinforcement doesn't produce the same results in that kind of ecosystem? How come positive reinforcement, Tom? How come it doesn't work? I mean, a lot of people out there would find it hard to believe, say, hey, we should be able to have, a lot of people out there, the naysayer would say, listen, even Navy SEALs, if we went positive reinforcement, we produced even better Navy SEALs. It's better at producing people. How come positive reinforcement, from your experience, doesn't work as magnificently as negative reinforcement? What is it about negative reinforcement that's so great? What is it about positive reinforcement that doesn't work as well in that ecosystem and isn't all it's cracked up to be? I'm excited for this.
So
I'm excited for this one, by the way.
I think we could get into trouble on this one because I think there's all kinds of factors, right? Because I mean, there are some people who respond better to positive reinforcement than negative reinforcement. Like some people just pack up their tent and call it, right? Like if they get in a negative reinforcement realm, they don't want to be a part of that organization. They don't want to be a part of people who do that, right? And there are sometimes high performers in that group, right? That don't respond well to negative reinforcement. And I don't know, maybe, for example, maybe it's an age thing, right? Maybe when you're young, you need positive reinforcement more than you need negative reinforcement. And maybe as you get a thick skin, you build up resiliency, you got a little grit, maybe you can deal with more negative reinforcement. And I think some people get it along the way at different times, at different manners. But so, I mean, obviously, why I think negative reinforcement is so powerful is because I think it sticks. I think, this is just me, and this is not. There's no science behind any of this, but I think negative reinforcement sticks. I think whenever you hammer somebody because they did something wrong, and hammering them when they do something wrong once, maybe that's not the right thing to do. But if they show a pattern of mistakes then you can pin that down to something that they should be able to correct, like lack of attention to detail. I mean, I think you got to go with the negative reinforcement route, right? Because the negative reinforcement route is going to, in my opinion, have the best chance to correct that behavior, right? And I think high performers are self-actualized enough and have enough emotional intelligence to understand, just like that swim coach told me when I was little, said, Tom, when the day I stop yelling at you is the day I stop caring about you. I think that high performers intuitively know that. I mean, if I'm going to exert energy and effort on you by yelling at you or punishing you in some way, it's not because I don't think you don't have talent, right? It's because I do think you have talent and I want to get the most out of you. So I think negative reinforcement, I think it sticks a lot better. I think that's undoubtedly true, number one. And number two, I think high performers want that honesty and they want that hard feedback and they want to use that negative reinforcement, and the anger that comes along with it, whatever, the chip on your shoulder that comes along with it, whatever it is that comes along with that negative reinforcement, to focus their efforts and their energy into that goal. Because I also think that high performers can, focus on attention to the details, focus on the problem, focus on the immediate goal without losing sight of the much larger goal, the much larger picture, and the big prize at the end of the day after the years of training. I mean, does that make sense? That's kind of where I'm coming from.
I've always been a big believer myself that pain is the greatest teacher, and it does, like you said, it gets your attention. I say, like Noah, you know, people training in jiu-jitsu and wrestling, like if you have all these people, you have a generation that the attention span of people now is probably the shortest it's ever been in human history, right? People 15, 20-second attention spans, their monkey mind, they can't. You go into a jiu-jitsu class, right, where pain is a consequence, right? If you don't pay attention to the instructor showing moves, right, you're hurting yourself when it comes time for the live rolls, right? It's a liability to not pay attention. It's a liability to be goofing off in class while the other guy is trying to choke you and armbar you and heel hook you and twist your knee, torque your knee, or slam you pretty hard. So it gets people's attention. And I remember one of the stories I would tell along these lines of pain being the greatest teacher. When I was a white belt, so it was 2001 or 2002, and I was living in Utah, and I went to California for a tournament. There were like 16, 17 guys in this tournament, including a guy who fought in the UFC, Nam Phan. And they threw the white belts and the blue belts together. They threw us in a weight class with guys that were 20 pounds heavier. So here I am, white belt. I'd wrestled a lot, right? I had a really strong wrestling background. I'm against these guys that are 20 pounds heavier. Some of them are blue belts. I'm a white belt. I have 5 matches that day. One of the matches was against Nam Phan, who wind up fighting in the UFC, was a good MMA fighter, won a lot of championships in submission grappling, very good grappler. So I go out there against Nam Phan, me being the wrestler. I pick him up, right? I pick him up. I'm feeling good about myself. I go out there, I pick him up. I've got him. He's airborne. His feet are off the ground. I'm taking him down, right? I pick him up and give him a little slam. Soon as we hit the ground, Nam Phan, 160, 165 pounds, these tree trunk thighs, is arm barring me and extending my arm, and my arm starts cracking and popping. My arm's going crack, 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 pop, 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 pop. Well, me with fight or flight and being stubborn, I'm not going to tap. I'm thinking I'm going to get my arm out and I'm going to get him, I'm going to do this and that to him. The referee hears the cracking and the popping. He can hear the arm popping and he stops it, right? He has the discretion to stop it, even if you don't tap. Even in UFC, the referee has discretion to say, this is going to be so dangerous, even if you don't tap, right? So he stops it. My arm, well, anyway, but by the way, to show you how hard-headed, it was double elimination. I wind up doing 2 more matches that day. I was icing my arm, and I was seething mad, and I was pissed. But I was like, I'm going to continue. I want to go back out there, and I want to try to get to the finals. I lost in the last 10 seconds of the semifinals. A match that I was winning. I got submitted and I got caught in a triangle. But I went back to Utah. I drive back. My arm the swelling in my arm over the next 6 weeks was like that. It was like it was like that. And so I was icing that thing religiously. Do you know that the consequence of that, right? Pain being the greatest teacher. It was so hard to armbar me after that. I learned, how do they set up the armbar? What does he got to do with his hips swinging out when he changes the angle? Defenses to the armbar was the best thing the best teacher of how do you avoid the armbar? How do you escape the armbar? Was that guy popping my arm. It was like, that got my attention to where I'm like, okay, that cannot happen again, right? So pain, again, it's like something like that was so negative, 2 months of not being able to do a whole lot with my arm, but that, again, pain being the greatest teacher. So I think that some of the power in our ecosystem. Now, Noah, this is the interesting thing. The instructors a lot of time don't have to be negative reinforcers a lot of times in jiu-jitsu, because the negative reinforcement a lot of times happens in the art itself. The art itself winds up being the negative. The pain itself, right? The instructor could be nice as can be, but the fact that limbs are being torqued and they could be popped and this is hurt and that is hurt, that is sort of a, short term. It's like, that's negative stuff. That's pain. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of inconvenience. But that winds up being part of the mastery of jiu-jitsu, to teach people and mold them, is the pain. The pain. If you took the pain out of our ecosystem, I mean, it's just, it doesn't have a lot of the power and the value and the transformation. It's the pain that's in that ecosystem. It's the struggle. It's the misery that's in that ecosystem that works a lot of the magic when we see people transformed and we see them dig deep and we see them change and grow these new habits. It's a lot of that is the pain and their little dance with pain. And so if we took the pain out of our ecosystem, like and like we talk, Noah and I talk about this too, there are some academies out there as jiu-jitsu gets bigger and more popular, there are academies that are diluting the standard, right? They're giving belts, they're giving blue belts, purple belts, brown belts, black belts, that a lot of people will look and say, wow, that's not the standard. That's not strict enough, right? You're not making them pay enough of a price to get that black belt. Yeah. So there's a big concern even in our ecosystem. Are a lot of academies diluting it? We call it McDojo, or is there sort of a McDojo effect? Because we want there to be a lot of struggle, a lot of pain in the ecosystem, because that's really, it's a phenomenal teacher. We only have you, Tom, for 10 more minutes. I was going to ask you about preparation, but no, I'm sure I speak for both of us that I want you on again. So we'll go over some of these things then. But you versus fear. Now, SEALs are not the easiest people to scare, but you versus fear. I know you don't like the unknown. You're super prepared. You're not, you know, you do everything you can so that there are no unknowns. But what advice would you give to people? Strategies, techniques, so that they can better manage their stress and their fears to perform at a higher level. What stands out to you? How do you get somebody to conquer those fears and perform better in big situations?
Yeah. So, I you know, you're not going to like this answer either. I don't have a good answer for this, but I'll answer it the best way that I can. And I'll preface this by saying that, you know, it's absolutely a real thing. It's a real thing for everybody, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. Fear is a real thing. And we have experts who come into the program and train students, and we have experts who work with active duty SEALs, you know, on the breathing techniques, the visualization techniques, the self-talk, all of the ways, the formal ways that people know how to deal with their fears, right? And so we do that. We actively do it. I participate in it, you know, and it helps. It certainly helps. Now, what I would say is that for me, in fear, and what I've seen that works, and what works for me is, is, you know, just recognizing that it's real, number one, recognizing that other people's fears are real, recognizing that fears can change, they can subside, they can grow, and you know, I'll be honest with you, I've seen on the battlefield where a guy is totally fine one day, and then you're in a similar situation the next day, but it doesn't look similar to him, and it ain't the same situation to him, and he's having a different experience than you're having, and you think it's the same thing as what you were doing yesterday, but not to him, and there is clearly more fear in him than you, or vice versa. And so I think, you know, depending or recognizing that all of these fears are real and they change for you, they change for people around you all the time, is the first step, right? I think acknowledging that is the first step, right? So I know that's not the answer that you wanted, but then I would say that, you know, this goes to something, you know, this fear thing goes to something that, you know, ties into what we're all experiencing in society today, you know, with Corona, right? The unknowns, the misinformation, the lockdowns, you know, the fact that the science changes and the data changes. And you know, and so a lot of society is really fearful of this, right? And they're really nervous about this, so much so that there's a cottage industry where, you know, SEALs and other special operations guys are getting on and doing seminars and symposiums talking about, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And so, you've heard this, and you may have even participated in some of these and seen some of these. And, the point there is that, getting comfortable being uncomfortable is going to help you with fear for sure. But me telling you that is not going to, you've got to go out there and get the reps. You got to go out there and get the reps, right? So you can go to Buds, and it's going to help you, be able to deal with fear and unknown and uncertainties, and, make decisions in those types of environments better than usual. But I doubt that that's what most people want to do, right? So I think that the way you can start to manage fear is, if you want to get comfortable being comfortable, if you want to be comfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable, I think what you need to do is you need to practice it. And look, if you like coffee, drink tea one day, right? If you go to the gym and you don't like doing push-ups, do push-ups, right? It's muscle confusion. If you're a runner, go swim. If you're a swimmer, go run. Believe me, I'm a swimmer. I hate running, but I run. I ran this morning, and I confirmed to myself that I hate it just as much as I always have, but I still do it, right? Because you got to go do it. You got to go do it, right? And you got to read books that you don't normally read. If you read nonfiction, go read fiction, right? If you haven't read poetry in a while, go read a Shakespearean sonnet. Go do things that make you uncomfortable, because that will carry over in all aspects of your life, in my opinion. That will help you deal with fear, because I think fear comes from the unknown and the uncertain aspects, right? So, do that. Prepare. We talk about preparation. We've talked about preparation this whole podcast, right? So prepare. If you got fear of getting on stage like I do, I'm not a big public speaker. Preparing will help that a lot, right? Authenticity. We've talked a little bit about authenticity. I think, if you're trying to fake who you are and fake what you believe while you're trying to do something, it's going to compound the fear. So be authentic in the way that you deal with your fears. So the point for fear to me is to manage it with those techniques, but also look, appreciate it. Appreciate fear. Fear is healthy. It's good, right? And it can help you perform at a much higher level, right? Fear can actually, if you know how to focus your fear, you can actually perform at a much higher level than you normally could, because it's there for a reason, man. It's good. Just learn to work with it and appreciate it and embrace it to some degree. I mean, think about this, right? So, a lot of people jump out of airplanes, right? But I can't imagine that anybody is completely comfortable the first time they ever jump out of an airplane. But eventually, some people do it for their jobs. We do it for the jobs, but a lot of people do it just because they want to go do it. But I guarantee you that nobody is comfortable jumping out of an airplane the first time. But very quickly, not only do they get comfortable with it, but they start loving it. They love it because of the fear that they now know how to control, right? Jumping out of that airplane. And they get good at it. They get proficient in the sky, and they get to the point where their aperture is opened up, and they're no longer looking through a soda straw because they're breathing too hard. They're hyperventilating and they can't think about anything. Now they're looking around and they're enjoying how beautiful it is, and they're enjoying being in the air with other people. And that's because they've learned to manage that fear, right? And all kinds, and we should try to do that all year, in my opinion.
Now, Tom, I could go on for another 2 hours, but I have a long list of top stuff here. But in the interest of Christmas Eve and 90-minute podcast, I just want to say thank you so much for being available to us and giving us so much good information. Would love to have you on again sometime in 2021 as that fits your schedule. Noah, I know you probably have a few final thoughts or a question. Now's the time, brother, and then we'll wrap it up, man.
Thanks, Frank. I know that after 25 years, you haven't had to make a lot of major career decisions because you've had that kind of made for you. It's either you stay on or you stay on or you stay on. And you've entered the workforce, I should say you've entered civilian life in a whole different context than what you left it in. And, nowadays there's a technology out of the tech firms, out of the tech industry, which is you fail fast, fail often. And that works great for business plans, but to shed 25 years of where you've earned your way to, and to fail fast, fail often. What are your thoughts, or even what are your feelings right now after speaking about fear and jumping out? Isn't this exciting?
Yes, it is. It is very exciting, and and I equate it to getting to learn a whole new game. And so, it's like being an ensign all over again, and getting to learn everything, and have the experience. That's kind of what I was talking about in the beginning. Like, I didn't know I didn't know the value I could add to a company, and I certainly didn't know how to articulate that. And now I do. Now I know what I can bring to a company, and I know how to do it, and I know that frankly, a lot of other people can't do what I can do for a company. So yes, that part is exciting, and that was a couple of big takeaways that I'm still processing from my first experience. But yeah, I mean, the way people think, the way people talk. I mean, every conversation, there's like a warm up. Like you talk for 2 or 3 minutes where everybody, we all ask each other how our dogs and cats are doing before we really start talking about the meat and potatoes. And at first I was just like, oh man, we're burning time, man. Let's roll. We got to roll. But I quickly liked that. I quickly got used to that. Right? It's a nice icebreaker. You learn a lot more about somebody than just how their dog's doing. You learn if they're in a good mood. You learn if they got any sleep. You learn if are we ready to do this thing today, or is Tom working at 50%? Like, so you learn a lot of neat stuff by going through those questions at the beginning. So some things I very quickly was like, aha, that makes good sense. Other things I still need to process, right? So but the beauty is I'm a lifelong learner. So this is right in my wheelhouse. It's like exciting to go to work every day because frankly, for the last 3 or 4 years of my career, people would come into my office with issues and problems, and I would know the answer before they would get halfway through the problem because I'd seen the problem 3 or 4 times, And so, I mean, that's nice, but it's not. You're not learning anything. So yeah, I had another point on that I was going to say, but I forgot what it was.
Well, the tech industry gives you that opportunity to fail.
Yeah. So with that, I say the tech industry opportunity to fail. I get it, and I equate it to I'm not sure I agree with it, but I get it. And I equate it in the military to the OODA loop, right? And I don't remember what that acronym stands for. It stands for it was made by this Air Force fighter pilot back in Korea, and the story is that he was, because the Americans got so many reps. The Americans we were the best. We've always been the best, but he got so many reps that he was able to get inside of the North Korean MiG's decision-making cycle, and he was able to disrupt his decision-making cycle to win. And that was the OODA loop. It's an acronym. It stands for something. I can't remember what it is, but it's basically a decision-making cycle. And the faster you can get inside of your enemy's decision-making cycle, then you control the decision-making cycle. I think I kind of got that close. You guys can go Google it and figure it out from there. But I think OODA loop has a piece of this. And then number two, and this is why I fundamentally don't agree with it, I think, is because, and I found this in my one experience is culture, right? I think if you're doing that, if you're failing like that, I mean, I get it. You fail and you grow and you learn and you adapt and you overcome, and there's a need for that. But that's half the battle, right? You've got to have a culture that allows that. You've got to have trust. We're back to trust now. You got to have trust in the organization. You got to have, people who are willing to give up of themselves for a bigger issue, which is really hard, I think, in this civilian world. I mean, it sounds good, but I think it's hard. But you got to have that. If you're going to do that, what you're talking about, fail fast and fail often, and you want to keep your team together, then you got to have a strong culture. And that culture's got to be centered around trust and people who are willing to fail, and leaders who are willing to allow people to fail and allow them to pick themselves up, make themselves better, start over again, knowing full well that you're going to waste some resources, your priority of efforts are going to get messed up, and you got to be you got to be authentic. You got to be real with yourself and say, look, if we're going to do this, it's more than just putting that on a bumper sticker and saying that that's my mission statement, because that won't get it. You'll leave a lot of good people behind if you do it that way, without spending time to develop the culture, talking to people, telling people why it's important to do it the way you want to do it, telling people what the expectations are, telling people what's going to happen if they fail and they get picked back up, telling people how you're going to help them succeed when they do fail. I mean, that takes a lot of effort, right? And you're going to leave a lot of good people behind if you just say that and do that without doing all the supporting pieces that are associated with it, in my opinion.
That's awesome stuff. Yeah, Elon Musk with his SpaceX, he's gotten a hold of that mentality, and it's working for SpaceX right now. Yeah.
Well, that's good, right? So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Tom.
You're up, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, when you get Elon Musk, what a high performing company, right? Mm-hmm. So he attracts high performers, and it probably works for things like Google and Tesla and those places that naturally attract high performers. But you got to get to that level before you can make a statement like that to attract the people that are going to respond to an environment like that, right? And so that works for like the 1%. To say that and then do it like that. For 99%, you got to build it. You got to build it with culture, and it takes a long time. You don't get culture overnight. You guys know that, but you get the culture, then you can work it like that. But I would imagine that Elon Musk and others are spending a lot of time communicating to people and telling them, look, this is okay. This is what I expect. We're in this together. We're a team. I trust you. You trust me. We've got lanes, responsibilities. We're going to win together. Those sorts of conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, this is it's been a great 90 plus minutes. Tom DeJarnette, we'd like to thank you again, Tom. Tom, if anybody out there sees this and they would like to, you do consulting, you work with executives and corporations, what's an email where people can reach you at?
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Frank. It's just Tom DeJarnette, my name. So I'll spell it out phonetically. Let me see if I can still remember how to do this. Tango, Oscar, Mike, and then there's no period, no dash or anything like that. It just goes Delta, Echo, Juliet, Alpha, Romeo, November, Echo, Tango, Echo at yahoo.com.
Like the 26
How was that?
years.
That was some marine. That was some marine stuff I pulled out there.
That's spot on. It's good for air traffic control too. Spot on. Awesome.
Awesome. Hey, well, happy Christmas to both of you guys. Merry Christmas Eve, and then Merry Christmas if you celebrate. And Tom, we'd love to have you back on again sometime in 2021. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm sure I'll be talking to both of you before then. But
guys, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Getting to talk with you guys. I learned a lot today, and I respect you guys so much. Getting to Frank, how much I respect you and the crucibles that you put yourself through and how you handle yourself and how you keep fighting every day. Noah, it's great to meet you. And like Frank was talking about knowing, somebody with a black belt and knowing what they go through. You being a Marine, and I know, that we're brothers in arms, and I appreciate your service as well.
Thank you. You too. All right. I'm going to stop it here, but